Funny enough, this was originally going to be a highlight video of my first experience running mod, but instead I ended up leaving all of my camera equipment at home, which ended up being a good thing because things did not go great, at least for my two-wheel drive classes. Anyway, that's not what this video is about. This is the second video on driver etiquette, the unwritten rules of RC racing as we know it. Even though this little hobby of ours is something to be enjoyed without worry, there are still rules that need to be followed in order for everyone to do so. I've already gone over a few things in a previous video, but I didn't go over very many things, just the large overarching things like letting people by when they're faster than you, and always putting your car down at a designated spot. However, there are a few more things I can go over that I've learned since then. Before you begin, however, I'd like to remind you to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already and like the video if you enjoy it. Without further delay, let's begin. Let's start with all the things we should always do off the track. First off is always being open to helping others. This should go without saying, but actively closing yourself away from others is no way to enjoy yourself in this hobby. RC racing is a social activity at heart and we're all in it together. Yes, we may be opponents on the track to an extent, I'll get to that later, but off the track we still share the same interest in racing toy cars. We all have some level of common ground. Always be willing to hold out a helping hand to those that might need it, whether it be lending them a part that they might not have but you do, or giving them tips on driving areas they may be struggling in. This doesn't just extend to driving or setup tips either. If you see somebody having a bad day, don't hesitate to talk to them and see how they're doing. A simple checkup on how someone's doing could be the difference between them leaving upset and not wanting to come back, and them leaving happy and wanting to come back. This also extends generally to being a good sport. If you made a mistake on the track, say you caused someone to spin out, always own up to it and apologize. Again, this could be the difference between someone being upset and not being upset. If you apologize to them and they still want to be mad at you, it's no longer on you though. On the other hand, if someone causes you to have a bad run or spins you out or something along those lines, try not to hold a grudge. It's simply not healthy to hold a grudge over toy car racing. Hell, it's not really healthy to hold a grudge period, but let's move on. Besides, even if they don't apologize, it's important to remember that very rarely do people actively go out of their way to crash into others intentionally in order to gain positions. Most of the time it's just lack of car control. If they do go out of their way to crash into you, that's something you should take up with the track managers. There's a universal rule at most big events that if there's a fight, both parties get kicked out regardless of who started it. Now when on the track, there's a lot of unwritten rules that may not be immediately obvious, so let's go over a few of them. First, we have the business of overtaking. Like in full-size racing, the business of overtaking can be quite a difficult one, which is why when someone is faster than you and is about to lap you, making the job easier for them by pulling over to the side and allowing them to pass is usually the best bet for everyone involved. Now this may be a bit different if you're first place and fighting for it at the top of your pack, but 90% of the time that isn't going to happen. This rule is especially prevalent in the settings of qualifying runs where everybody is on their own time and overtaking or being overtaken doesn't mean a whole lot in a large span of things. If somebody is faster than you and you're not holding them up, or you are holding them up, in a qualifying run, all you're doing is hampering both of your qualifying runs. You're not advancing any further up the field by doing so. Another thing to note about driving is when you inevitably crash. When being marshaled, it's important to, and let me emphasize this, do not lay on the throttle when someone is holding your car. Again, this is something I mentioned in my previous video, but it needs to be said again. Even though these little cars are in the end toys, they can be very dangerous toys. I have a few scars on my hands from people laying on the throttle even while I was holding their car about to put it back on their wheels. Getting rubber embedded into your skin isn't fun. The only real exception to this would be nitro vehicles, as they need the constant throttle in order to avoid stalling. In that case, it's usually best as a marshal to pick the car up by the spoiler or the nose to avoid burns. One small thing that was brought up to my attention by a comment was to avoid roosting the marshal who just flipped you over. Roosting basically means kicking up a dust cloud with wheel spin. It's a small thing, but it's a thing nonetheless. Another small thing to note is oddly your posture on the driver's stand. We hear it all the time from our parents to stand up or sit up straight, but that's also important to do on the driver's stand for one main reason. See, because a lot of 10 scale tracks are smaller and tend to maximize the amount of track space they have, lots of times the track is right up against the driver's stand. Because of this, if you were to say lean over the railing like this, the person next to you simply can't see certain parts of the track. A simple way to avoid this? stand up straight and don't lean over the railings. Another thing to make sure you do is to stay quiet on the driver's stand. Racing RC cars requires a lot of focus, and somebody making a fuss right next to you can take away from that focus. On the other hand, when you do decide to speak, make sure it's important, like for example when your car flips over. One popular quality of Masters of Dirt was watch the tabletop. If you flip over on the high traffic area like a tabletop, or especially on straight, make sure you call it out loudly so everyone on the stand can hear. Now once you're done driving, say after a race or even a practice session, it's important to marshal the track for a few minutes. Of course, this wouldn't be the case if you were to say have some kind of disability, then you won't have to worry about it. But if you were physically able to, go out there and marshal for other people. Trust me, they will appreciate it. Another thing to note when you actually are marshaling, something you would probably hear a lot from the race announcer before a race. Watch your corner and not the race. Now of course it's tempting to watch the race that you yourself are literally standing in the middle of. Marshalling after all can be very boring, especially if you're marshalling a nitro race. It can go on for 30 minutes or more. However, remember a saying that you might have been told before. Marshal others the way you would want to be marshaled. You wouldn't want to crash and have the closest marshal be on their phone, right? Another thing to note about marshalling in general would be to how to do it effectively. Each type of RC car is different, from two-wheel drive buggies to short course trucks. All of them have different ways in which you flip them effectively, so let's go down the list of how to marshal different cars. For buggies, wrapping your hands around the body with both of your hands like this and flipping it is the most secure way to flip a buggy on its lid. Speaking of which, don't pick up the buggy only by the lid like this, as you risk either slipping out of your hands or straight up pulling the body off. This goes the same for stadium trucks without the risk of pulling off the body because of those body clips. Next up we have short course trucks. You usually have to get at these by the closest part of the truck to you, relatively speaking. Of course, grabbing the whole body and flipping it over like a buggy can work if you have larger hands, but if you don't, there are a few other places you can grab one. By the front bumper here, the rear bumper here, and the side body braces here and here. For e-buggies and e-truggies, you can usually treat them like heavier and larger buggies and stadium trucks, but for nitro vehicles, grabbing them like this is by far the easiest way to burn yourself. Grabbing a nitro buggy or truggy by its spoiler or nose is a much safer bet. The last and most important unwritten rule that I've seen so many people struggle with is to simply enjoy themselves. At the end of the day, we're racing toy cars. Unless you're a top-level driver whose livelihood depends on your race standings, there's very little need to take RC racing that seriously in a way that I see a lot of people do. Something that a lot of people may have noticed about me when I'm driving is that very few things will get me upset on the driver's stand. Mostly because, just like this pencil, there's no point. Getting upset over things outside of your control, like getting a bad marshal, or having someone take you out on the track, like I mentioned before, these things are almost never done intentionally. Even with things within your control, there's no need to get upset, as there's almost always a solution to the problem you may be having. When I went to Hobbytown Columbus after Masters of Dirt, I had a lot of traction problems with my two-wheel drive buggy. I got a little bit frustrated thinking it was my driving that was the issue, which to be honest it probably was part of it, but it was also the tire compound that I used wasn't ideal for this particular clay track. I also could have changed my setup a little bit more to generate more rear grip coming out of the corners, like more toe-in and less rear anti-squat. If these two things don't work though, there's always another solution to try out. If your car is handling poorly, there are things you can do to change it. That's why RC companies put so much effort into allowing you to change so much about it from the factory settings. The reason I don't let these things get to me is because not only do these things generally not make you feel better, but because I want to set an example for others both in and out of the hobby. I remember talking with an RC drifter who tried to get into RC racing, but was put off by two grown men getting into a fight over a $15 trophy. I don't want RC racing to be in the news because two people got into it and Fox 5 caught on that two grown men were fighting over racing toy cars. I wanted it to be in the news for the stupid high amount of turnout for a race or something like that. I also remember a sign at Beach RC that said, "If you're sponsored, act like it." Well, to be honest, anytime you go out and race, you're not just representing yourself, you're also representing the RC hobby as a whole. I'm not saying don't get upset ever. Getting upset is simply a human reaction that can't be avoided. I'm saying don't let the little stuff get to you. Like I said in my previous videos, this hobby is supposed to be fun, and it's up to us to allow it to be fun. That's all for now. If you liked the video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you want to support me another way, be sure to subscribe to my Patreon where I post updates about my next videos and what they'll be about. It's also where you directly influence where my next videos will be about as well. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, Lucas Tarka, RC World Discord server, Ben Reeves, and Casey Nix. This has been Roach RC, and I'll see you next time.